Hello. So this is the Queen's Council brown bag, and the focus on this one is on communications. It's an extension of the relationships topic that we've been talking about. And when I think about communication, of course, it's the sharing and exchange of information, of feelings, of thoughts with ourselves and each other and different groups and hoops and loops of people that we're intertwined with as well. It's also how we communicate with ourselves, what we say, and our inner dialogue too. So I just want to expand that it's really whatever's resonating for you in this moment, because for you, you might feel like you're actually a great communicator when it comes to talking and sharing how you're feeling and what you're thinking with other people. And yet you also might find that the inner dialogue is challenged, that you have a great inner critic, that you snap at yourself, that you put yourself down or condescending or belittling. Perhaps you're actually inflated, maybe too. I don't know. It really is kind of a full spectrum here. But hopefully, the purposes of this conversation, at least sharing on my point, is that it will spark some deeper thinking and deeper processing on how we might all support ourselves in communicating more effectively, more compassionately with each other and with ourselves. So I wanted to put this into 4 segments. But the first part is really about effective communication strategies and how they can build strong working relationships. When we talk about communication skills, we're not just referring to what we say, but also how we listen. Effective communication combines 2 major elements: active listening and creating a clear message. And we often have to listen if we're going to craft a coherent and professional message. How do we know if the message we are sending is being received and interpreted in the way we intended? So, how many times can you think of when you expressed yourself and you really felt like you were not being heard? And in fact, whatever someone said and did was reactionary, or it completely jumped subjects. It was a complete misinterpretation. How many times have you felt stifled in your throat, where you feel like you can't get your word out and it wasn't received? Or vice versa, you just are not getting what the other is saying. And as much as you're trying to listen and trying to understand, it's just not coming through. People can interpret the same message in different ways. So asking clarifying questions to ensure that everyone is on the same page is, of course, really good. And that might mean, and we're going to talk about ways of doing some repeat, as well as the second part I want to bring up is nonviolent communications. The Center of Nonviolent Communication has a lot of different information and great resources, and I just want to give you 4 fundamental processes that are effective when you're working and communicating with somebody else. The third being understanding and evaluating our needs. So what does that mean? Well, part of that goes into what we're saying to someone else and constructing a communication that's really about identifying on what isn't being met within us and what is it that we're needing out of that dialogue. And this is tied into assertive communication too, right? So it might be evaluative words with confused feelings. So being able to just have that self-awareness of, okay, this is how I'm feeling. I'm feeling blamed. And the feelings that are coming up for me is angry and scared, confused. It's those types of things. And then you're tuning into, okay, what are my needs? So I want to bring you through that reflection today too. And then lastly, I want to teach you one of my favorite tools that, I've been using this approach for so long, I can't even say how it came about and evolved, but I'm sure that all of you have used something to this degree, or perhaps someone's used it with you, or maybe it will just make a lot of sense and you're like, oh, I want to try that. I want to bring this into the way I communicate a little bit more effectively and assertively. So let's begin. We're talking about best practices for communication. And I really wanted to take us through an exercise on listening and seeing what I'm sharing, and then what you internalize it as and what it looks like for you. There's no right or wrong way here, but because there's we're not able to do this on audio, I'm going to forgo this exercise, but I really want to just put that out there of how we're listening and how we're perceiving things, and how it's important to sometimes mirror back and to listen and just simply say, hey, let me repeat what I've just heard, because I want to make sure that I'm really listening and honoring you. And that might seem like it takes a lot of time, but I can just remind you that it takes a lot more time and a lot more effort when you're not feeling like you've learned something and then you have to repeat it over and over. And then there becomes some form of miscommunication, resentment, and all these other kind of negative after effects. So if you're having an important conversation, or you're feeling like it's maybe a tenuous one where you really need to make sure, this is when you're going to be using that, so that you're tuning in with your own listening skills. And that's the best way to do it. Ask if you can repeat. Ask if you can say it back, and then be, oh, no, you're not saying it right. This is not what I meant. Then you say, I apologize. I really honor what you're saying, so let me get this straight. Can you say it again? Let me get this right. Most of the time, most people are grateful that you're taking the time and that you really do want to get it right. Another one is putting yourself in your other person's shoes when you're communicating. And just for a moment, that goes back to not just listening to them openly with compassion, but also trying to empathize a little bit with, to understand what they're going through, and even to feel and tap in emotionally, so that, and I'm not saying take on their emotions if they're feeling angry, but better understand where they're coming from and putting yourself in their shoes. How many times do we get so defensive and into our own ego because someone said something, I'm angry at you, or I'm really resentful of this, or this is what I need, without actually having you take that time to put yourself in their shoes. We go right into defense. We go right into backing up and blocking up our heart and getting hurt. And of course, then once we're in a place of pain, once we're in a place of feeling like we're being misunderstood or being put down, then we're actually not even get to the root of what they're trying to express. Because oftentimes, if they're having some sort of verbal emotion like that, are they acting out of their own pain body? Are they acting out of their own emotion and their own ego? Or out of something that they're having a need that's not met, but they haven't maybe developed a communication to say it in an effective way. But we can dive into and put ourselves into their shoes and at least just try to understand them a little bit more before criticizing them or judging them or off-writing them completely. And then, as you know, when we off-write them, when we don't want to take them seriously, when we want to just say it's not, this is them, it's not me kind of thing, well, then we're not really communicating anymore, right? So I want that to be another piece to this. It's listening and repeating and mirroring ourselves, and it's putting ourselves in their shoes. And the other piece that comes to mind, depending on who this is, if it's a sibling, if it's a parent, if it's a child, if it's a work colleague or a boss. Of course, the context varies a little bit different, but I just encourage you to see if you can remember, am I doing these steps as well? So the second part that I wanted to tune into is this nonviolent communication piece. And let me pull up this great thing that I have that I really appreciated. I got the language, the Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life by Marshall Rosenberg. He wrote this in 2013, and he said, believing that it's our nature to enjoy giving and receiving in a compassionate manner, I have been preoccupied most of my life with two questions. What happens to disconnect us from our compassionate nature, leading us to behave violently and exploitatively? And conversely, what allows some people to stay connected to their compassionate nature under even the most trying circumstances? While studying the factors that affect our ability to stay compassionate, I was struck by a crucial role of language and our use of words. I have since identified a specific approach to communicating, both listening that leads us to give from the heart, connecting us with ourselves and with each other in a way that allows our natural compassion to flourish. I call this approach nonviolent communication, with the term nonviolence as Gandhi used it, to refer to our natural state of compassion when violence has subsided from the heart. So basically, when we're speaking about nonviolent communication, I think it's really important to recognize that it gives us a reframe for how we express ourselves with others. Instead of habitual automatic reactions, our words become conscious responses based on firm awareness and of what we're perceiving, feeling, and wanting. We're led to express ourselves with honesty and clarity while simultaneously paying others a respectful and empathetic action. And in exchange, we get others to hear our deeper needs and those of others. So it's a real training, but there's 4 components to this training that I just want to encourage all of you to be thinking through. And it's easier said than done. I understand that. And so we're all doing this as a work in progress. But I do think that it can be really helpful. The one is that observing, and this goes really back to like when we're having and needing to assert our needs. So a mother might expressing to her child, something like that, or a partner to their partner, or maybe an employee expressing it to their boss. So it could be a vertical relationship, it could be a horizontal relationship, depending on if there's a power or age or significant, but it still doesn't hurt to be able to say, I've observed this and it's affecting my well-being. That's the thing that you need to check in. Observing but not judging. I've observed. Now you could say that you've left a mess on the floor multiple times without the judgment of it. Why have you done this? What were you thinking? Which is more criticism and putting them into that questioning. But just your observation. I observe this. So that's the first piece. Because the other wouldn't be very effective. Remember, it just immediately pushes us back and it activates our ego and our pain body. And I can say I've had it happen to me multiple times, and I shrivel up like a little kid, and I end up acting like I'm, not acting, but I end up feeling very much like I'm a 7-year-old girl with my tailbones, wrapped underneath me. And that's how it feels. So we can kind of go back to how many times we've had someone just tell us the why haven't you done this? And criticize in that critical way. And it immediately pulls us back into defense. Our energetic fields just go completely, we wall up. So our hearts stop and we can't be compassionate to the next step. The second is we state how we feel about our observations. So in this book, Marshall spends a considerable amount of time coaching us on how to actually get in touch with our feelings. And most of us are not in touch with our feelings. And so this is really where I wanted to use a couple sheets and handouts that I'm going to have on the website that are really wonderful in just evaluating, what am I feeling? Because oftentimes we can't even verbalize it. We don't even know how to articulate it, right? Are we angry, or are we actually feeling blamed? Are we angry, or are we feeling betrayed? Or are we feeling distrusted? It's so easy for us to just go, I'm angry, this is how I'm feeling, right? As opposed to tuning in, getting real clarity on how we're feeling. So that's a really helpful handout. And I know that, of course, when we're in the middle of a confrontation, or in the middle of a heated discussion, or we're just an emotional, it's a little harder to do this. So I want you to just take this with lots of compassion for yourself, that this is a growing, piece, and that this is more about reflection. At the end of the day, in your journaling, you take out your piece of paper and go, this is what I was really feeling. This is how I could have done it more. Because it's all about self-awareness. And it's all about us starting to become a little bit more aware and articulate within our own bodies and how we're sensing. I'd also encourage you, just because there's the mind-body, connection, is where you're holding that. And where are you feeling it? Are you feeling it in your throat? Are you feeling it in your chest, in your heart? Are you feeling it in your solar plexus? Are you feeling it deeper in your womb, or in your, sacrum area? So thinking about, or maybe you're feeling it in tension in your shoulders or your feet. Goodness knows, but I just want you to start to tune into where you're holding that energy. Because of course, unresolved energy creates dis-ease and other types of somatic change and pain. So the third step to the nonviolent is we state the needs that create our feelings. Underlying all of our feelings are unmet needs. We want to shine the spotlight of our awareness here, rather than complain, criticize, blame, and otherwise throw this kind of the ick sauce on what we're feeling, right? We want to slow down and identify what we need in any given situation. And this brings back this other really helpful handout. And I've done some research, and I can tell you, and I'm going to try to put something together for the purposes of this brown bag, as well as for overall for the Queen's Council and any of my other clients that I work with. But you can also expand upon this on a Google search. So one is understanding the needs list, and it's broken down based on autonomy, connection, harmony, honesty, meaning, play, and physical well-being. Physical well-being would be our basic sleep, food, sustenance, shelter, water, sexual expression. Connection might be feeling that consistency and cooperation, or security, stability, support. And meaning might be that you're feeling like you're needing hope. Maybe there isn't hope in your organization, and you're just working and you feel like a hamster on a hamster wheel and there's no hope. Like tuning into what emotions are coming up. Are you needing more meaning in your role, in your workplace? Efficacy. Are you needing to feel mattered a little bit more? That you're expressing yourself and doing something that has purpose. Self-expression. Or more like the autonomy being space to breathe, to have spontaneity and independence, to feel empowered and freedom. Okay? So it is about us being able to state our needs. And I'm going to again refer to this great handout where one is the evaluative word of being able to understand an emotion that you're feeling. Maybe it's hassled, criticized, belittled, those types of things. And to the right of it is the feelings that might be coming up for you. So you can start to analyze, oh, this is what I'm feeling. Maybe this is what's at the root. Like if I'm feeling sad and frustrated, maybe I'm not feeling distrusted. Maybe I'm feeling distrusted, excuse me. And maybe what I'm needing is trust and honesty. So use this as a tool for you, for your own self-exploration. I really, really encourage you to play around with it. You can always reach out and email me too if for some reason you're not getting it or finding it. So then you get to tune into the feelings when you enjoy what's happening. Confident, connected, engaged, excited, hopeful, refreshed, peaceful, joyful. All of those other, those wonderful words where you feel invigorated and jubilant and everything. That's the other portion of the needs. And then the fourth stage, again, the first is observe behaviors that are affecting our well-being. Second is state how we feel about our observations. Third is we state the needs that create our feelings. And fourth is we make a request for concrete actions that will enrich our lives. We can state our needs and make a request. This actually ties really into what I wanted to share with you towards this next phase, and I really wanted to open up for people to message me and say, hey, I have this challenging conversation coming up, or this is something that I have a really hard time asking for. Maybe it's a roommate, maybe it's with your kids. We can play around with this and get creative, but maybe we can do this in the office hours, so you could bring a specific question or a specific need that you need met by somebody else, and we'll use this process, and you can practice with it, and you can practice with me too. We can role play. So I want to step into this next part of making a request, because when we can make a request in a specific way, it can be incredibly rewarding to see how quickly it can be met, and met with a new form of getting to know each other, with a new form of feeling like you're even getting closer to each other, even after you've had maybe even resentment building up. All of a sudden, you are feeling heard, and you're feeling like your needs matter, and that your feelings are important, and that this person does care. And it's really about what we as an entity are going to do about it, if that makes sense. That brings in this other piece. So there's two things that I want to connect with. First is what gets in the way. As this author says, it's our nature to enjoy giving and receiving compassionately. We have, however, learned many forms of life-alienated communications that lead us to speak and behave in ways that injure others and ourselves. One form is life-alienating communication is the use of moralistic judgments, and implies wrongness and badness on the part of those who don't act in harmony with our values. Ooh, can you just think of some of those? I can certainly align to times when I, and sadly reflect back that I thought was so in line with my value and was important to me, that I came off with my moralistic judgment of wrongness or badness to this other person. Especially this is in a hard place, like if you have someone that is doing something that you disagree with. Maybe it's drinking too much, for example, or partying too much, or what have you. And then you come off because you can't understand where they're coming from. And instead you sit on your pedestal and you put them down. So I'm just kind of using that as I've had to make a long, winded growth on my own way of approaching things for my own personal relationships, and also in the way that I approach my clients when we're working on self-care and healthy habits and wellness. But this is a full spectrum, so I just want you to tune into how often do you think that we've actually alienated those that we love and care for because we've come down on them with our judgments. Another is the use of comparisons, when we block compassion for others and for ourselves. This also tunes into just comparing ourselves to others too, and our own inner voice, our own inner critic. That we are each responsible for our own thoughts and feelings and actions. And then we come up with these demands. But it's really just another characteristic of language that blocks compassion. So there's a slippery slope here, right? When we're asking and requesting something, it's not that we're demanding something. And we can bring this up into further debate, certainly, and I welcome you guys to email me or open it in the Queen's Council that we're going to be meeting this month. So there's a couple primary obstacles just to keep in tune. The moral judgments. He's a bad person. That's just wrong. Comparisons, right? Comparing yourself to somebody who is doing something completely different with their life and doesn't follow your values, right? Denial of responsibility. This is a big one. And this goes back to when we take consideration of our own as part of this dialogue, of this communication. We have to remember that when someone does or says something, it's about them, right? And that how we feel, how we internalize it is really up to us. They can't hurt our feelings. It's really how we internalize and perceive their actions, and are we taking it personally? Which is a hard one, because there's a flip side to that, and it's something that we can dive into in another conversation about how we mirror ourselves, and how the parts of ourselves that are annoyed by others, for example, are often the parts that we need to work on too, right? But it's really important to just take responsibility for your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And other people's behaviors may be a stimulus for our response, but they are never the cause. That's a huge distinction. Lastly, making demands rather than requests, which is what I said before. Making a demand is not a compassionate way to communicate. No one likes to feel coerced into a behavior. Clean that up, right? Can you take out the garbage? That might be a little bit more, but there's sweeter ways of doing it. So it's not necessarily a demand, it's more of a request. Okay, so we're getting somewhere here with this. And another piece that I think is really important is just taking responsibility for our own feelings. A lot of people come to me where they feel wronged, or that it's unfair how someone else is communicating or treating them. And it's really just some kind of reaction to stimulate a feeling in us. So if someone says something, it's a stimulus to our feelings or responses, but it's never the cause. As Epictetus, I can't pronounce his name, Epictetus, he was an old philosopher, he once said, people are disturbed not by things, but by the view they take of them. So that's really, really, really important to wrap our brains around and bring into our lives. Someone says or does something that annoys us, we almost always think that what they said that makes us upset, but it's never that. It's that we've been triggered. And I go into that a little bit more in another way, but this is where you get to practice observing. What did you observe without judgment? What happened? Feelings. What did I experience? I felt safe. I felt fear. Whatever. Needs. What unmet needs am I experiencing? Need to feel safe. Request. What would I request of that person? And then lastly is my favorite thing that I wanted to share and bring up. And this really is supposed to be more of an experience where we're talking and doing this in the Queen's Council, where we can bring and role play a little bit. But I just want to introduce it. And that is a process of asking for our needs. And I have a handout, handy dandy handout on the love sandwich. And the love sandwich I've shared many, many times, and it's one of my favorite approaches. A love sandwich is a metaphor for a way to communicate your needs in an effective and loving yet assertive manner. You can use it when you have needs that are not being met, offer feedback, or also create boundaries. So first is preparing the bread. The bread is what holds the metaphorical sandwich together. It's the language we use to deliver the filling, the meat, the vegetables, whatever it is, the inside, so that our communication doesn't fall apart, so that we don't trigger someone else's ego, pain body, and cause and put up a wall, and then none of what we said, none of the feedback that we might have, or expressing our desire to get something done or have a change, right, is actually absorbed into their consciousness. They just block it. So it's really important that we prepare the bread before we get to the filling. To prepare the bread, we start with communication statements such as, I love you and I appreciate you. Or, I'm so grateful that, I really love it when you ... Something like that. The second part is and I could say that's kind of where the butter is too, because it's it's the sweet stuff. It's the stuff that sticks. The second would be the part where you're giving feedback or you're stating one of your needs. And then lastly, it's that putting the bread back on the other side. So that's the butter on the other side, so that all the pieces stick together. It's the first thing and the last thing that someone says. So it would be something like, and how can we do this together? And I love you. I'm grateful. And we're a team. Or I'm really glad I can share this with you, and I appreciate you listening. And I hope we can come up with a solution together. So that's the kind of summing up on being able to express your needs. Of course, there's so many other aspects to communication that are important, and it depends on different relationships and everything. But I do really encourage you to find out where you're at and where you break down in conversation. Is it when you feel like you're scared to say something because someone's going to get angry and their rage? Are you scared because you're going to hurt them, which is often angry and rage? Do you feel like you just express yourself the wrong way? There's different ways of setting yourself up to be able to express yourself. The other piece is, again, seeing if that your loophole is actually that you're not really listening. And that goes back to what I was talking about in the beginning portion, is how important it is to listen effectively and to repeat and mirror what you've heard, and also to and state that, and then also being able to just hold space for the process of not having to always be right. I think the biggest piece is coming back to this place of love and this idea of partnership, of community, of that we're all in this together, and that, you know, we're the weakest link. Meaning, if we can have humility and reverence for this other person is where they're at and what they're going through, it's certainly going to, in the end, pay off for us too. And whether or not if we're not honoring ourselves and knowing what our core needs are, or we're not even taking time to really reflect what are these emotions that are going through my body, we're just acting on them, behaving on them. Maybe it's over exercising, maybe it's binge eating and emotional eating, maybe it's drinking too much, all those little vices that kind of come up to supplement, to kind of cover up unmet emotions. Then we can tune into what need to be met. And so there's always a process to being able to how we can relate to ourselves better and honor ourselves and these sacred bodies and temples that we reside in that are strong and yet so fragile. And also how we can really claim our sovereignty and identifying and knowing ourselves. Knowing thyself is to heal thyself, right? That also is such a huge aspect to having a effective communication, compassionate relationships. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. And I look forward to kind of expanding this conversation in the Queen's Council as well in the deeper dive. The other little thing that I was going to mention is that we're coming up with 36 questions. It's an evidence-based process on getting to know each other in the conversation of relationships and diving deeper and learning about each other and holding space for each other a little bit more. So that will be another thing that we get to look forward to doing, and just deepening our friendships, deepening our relationships. So please let me know what you think if you have any questions, and I am so grateful that you could be listening to this. Thank you for taking the time.